let's just lay out what Elon has accomplished. So SpaceX, when they launched that rocket, the Falcon 1 in 2008 on his 4th try with his team into space, into orbit, they were the first privately built rocket ever to go to space. Before that, nation states, USSR, United States, China, with like 1 million times the resources had done that, right? So just objectively insane. Tesla, purpose obviously is to usher in renewable energy for society, sustainable renewable energy. They're also the first mass manufacturing car company in 100 years not to go bankrupt. So 2 of the most impossible things you could have done, he did them at the same time. How many people could have done one of those things? Like, we're talking less than 5, maybe. To do 2, he's one of 1. Nobody else could have done both.
Welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. We've got Trung Phan, Jack Butcher, and Bilal Zaidi here. Boys, I'm wired, mate. I was just saying, I'm on the cold brew life right now. I'm on number 3. Got me a little hype. I just had a weekend away from my boy's wedding. What's going on with you boys? Jack, heard you were out on the town.
Let's breaking news. Sam Altman just tweeted, caffeine is the best drug. So there you go, Bilal.
There we go.
I
wasn't even reading the timeline.
Is that breaking news? I don't know. But actually, let me throw one quick thing. I've been doing something that Jack Butcher might agree with. I've been drinking pre-workout for no reason.
What, just why would I
before
agree?
a podcast?
With this? You're the caffeine.
Yeah. No, you're drinking pre-workout before a podcast.
Did you not hit pre-workout back in the Jack?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Before the workout,
there you go.
Not,
VPN
not
shotgun
or
VPX shotgun. You remember that? Jack 3D.
Hey, that shit will make your heart explode.
My nose, I used to get nosebleeds off that stuff. Crazy.
Wait, Jack, I wasn't just saying this, man. I was like, I remember you talking about pre-workout.
Yeah. I thought, no. I mean, in that context, I thought you were saying that was I was waking up every morning and before I get on the laptop, I'm doing it.
This is a way of like surviving with, as a parent, like pre-workout's very allowed.
But all jokes aside, Trung, you're taking pre-workout just general life, not
like I was
not like before workout.
I was doing
I don't recommend that.
Well, I'll tell you what's funny. I got it before my runs, but then I just started being like, man, I like this buzz right when I wake up. The thing is that I'm not buying it again. I'm not buying it again. Like I'm finishing this one thing of C. It's called C4. I mean, if it's called C4, like
it's nitro. Yeah.
Let me add the one last thing, guys. Huge shout out to George Mack. I got a lot of messages about the episode last week. Incredible. Yeah, like man. Mac, thank you, George. I know you're listening. Thank you. That's all I'm gonna say.
I will say, also shout out to, I won't say the name, but someone, I mentioned about the Creator Lab guest who had asked me to take out the filler words. Someone was like taking the transcript and like searching, doing Control and F, looking at how many were said, and I was like, oh my god, this is so bad. I'm gonna get in trouble for this one. But they didn't get the right person in the end. So, but yeah, shout out to the listeners, man. That was fun.
You know what I'm shocked about? I didn't hear very many, like after Jack mentioned Cuck Chair a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
We got so many messages about Cuck Chair.
Is a classic.
I haven't heard a single thing about the anal print. I was shocked.
Yeah. So I got a text about that last week.
Not a single person. Okay, Bilal no one messaged me. He's like, hey man, can you send me the research paper? I'm curious about the anal print. Nothing. People.
Nothing, man.
If we
That's why it hasn't taken off commercially, fan. There's your,
If we ever do much, we just need a picture of the cuck chair, but no words, just a chair in the corner, and people will know what it is. It's like an inside joke. That'll be good. All right, Jack, we heard you had a bit of a weekend as well. What was going on?
Yeah, I actually had an NIA listener in town, friend I've
of the
known
pod
for a couple of years, and probably listening to this right now, came through with a link up for the Odessa concert here in Nashville. They played a amphitheater on Friday night, and then we hit the town afterwards. I was just telling you boys, we paused the storytelling so we could get it on record.
Yeah.
For anyone who is familiar, Nashville has like a little strip. Broadway is like Austin 6th Street, the bachelorette capital of America, so I'm told. So we go do the show and then go out afterwards, and this guy gave his girlfriend his ID. So he was out without an ID on Broad. And Tennessee is like, they don't mess about with ID. Like I've gone out with my dad and they ask him for his ID. The guy's 70.
Yeah.
It's like you have
just
to
the
do
law.
it, right?
Yeah. Because
So
he could be undercover cop or something.
yeah. So we're like walking up and down Broadway. There's 50 bars there. So it's like, somebody's going to let you in or not do it at some point. And I was like, before I'd hyped up this place, Kid Rock's Honky Tonk, 3-story metropolis on Broadway in Nashville, and couldn't get in there because big queue, 10 security guards checking ID like 5 times. So anyway, we're going around, blah, blah, blah. And eventually he persuades someone working the bar in one of these bars to go in the lost and found drawer and give him an old ID that hasn't been picked up.
That's so good.
Yo, that is smart, man.
And by the way, though, it's like the disparity in visual is so
Was
insane.
it even the same race?
It was.
Yeah, wasn't it the same race and sex? Hey, Jennifer
yeah.
Chen,
Same race and sex, but every other characteristic could not be further from.
Like different hair color,
just like.
Thank you, Michelle Lee. Thank you for
15,
coming
20
in.
years older than him. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Different facial hair, just completely different. It's like,
yeah, that's incredible. But
Yeah.
you made it in the end.
no, they get that. We go to the Kid Rock place. They're not checking ID.
Oh,
We
that's funny, man.
we spent 6 hours trying to procure a way in there.
When you say convinced,
need
did
it.
he slip him a 20? Like, how did he convince?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I was not privy to the negotiation. I was doing something else, and then I saw him, and he's like, "Look what I got." Yeah.
He
Michelle
probably gave
ID.
a Jack Butcher check. He's like, yo, just tell me your address. I'll send you this check. Just
Send it on the chain there and then.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a quick question. What is the level of safeness? Do you feel safe? You know, a lot of these party streets, right? Like you go to Bourbon Street in New Orleans, things can get pretty crazy, but like you feel a little bit unsafe sometimes. How safe is Broadway? Do things spill over? Are there stabbings, or is it just like bar fights every now and then, but people have a good time? I'm serious.
I honestly haven't been that many times, but I don't feel like New Orleans, to me, the one time I've been there did feel like you got to know what you're doing a little bit. Like I would not get
edge, yeah.
I wouldn't get like completely
blasted,
divorced from my mental faculties in New Orleans. But Nashville, maybe I feel a little bit more. It's like they've got the mobile prison at the end of the street and like coppers on every corner. And it's not a big street. It's like 2 or 3 blocks. It does feel like it's way more under control than your typical like sprawling. And this was a long time ago. I went to New Orleans. Austin 6th Street is also little loose in my experience, but no, I'm obviously encouraging people to travel to Nashville. Come bring your bring your friends,
bring the
come
vibes.
enjoy some live music, some good food,
honky tonk.
Well, here, let me though. I want Bilal's opinion on this too, because I'm very curious about his various stories, because Bilal lived in a lot of different places. So in Vancouver, there's a huge gang problem in the early 2000s. A lot of East Indian gangs, Asian gangs. So they actually created a gang squad. It was like a police unit of 12 people, maybe more. But they had what they would do every Friday, Saturday. There's like probably 20 major clubs in downtown area. They would literally just have 12 cops roll into the clubs. They point at guys, gang members. They all knew each other. Gang members knew the cops. Cops knew, they just pointed like, okay, you're done. Like there's like, if you're here, you're gonna get arrested. It's like, this is the rule. No gang members allowed in these clubs. And stopped everything. It's like literally just completely stopped it. And then but literally you'd be out and you just see a dozen cops roll into a place. And then I saw once that like clearly this guy was a gangbanger, and he just saw the cop and he just kind of smiled like, okay, leaving. You know, like they all know each other. It's like, okay, I'm leaving. Sorry, man. Like I'm out of here. Like they have like an understanding, right? But completely cleaned it up. Well, they kind of moved the violence to another part of the city.
They moved it to the block. Yeah,
moved it to the block. But curious, Bilal, if you have anything similar to how Jack mentioned, they got the prison on not the mobile prison, but like, things are rowdy, but they're maintainable. Do you have any?
You mean in New York or just in general?
Maybe New York or London, probably.
I think honestly, London was more growing up, because back it might just be the era, it might be the age, it might be who I was hanging out with versus now, and I think that was more. Yeah, there was a lot. Also, the sort of places I went to as an 18-year-old was very different to now. So I think there was definitely a lot more like a bit more trouble sort of thing. And I think it was, I mean, we were just talking about Top Boy, the show on Netflix, and Jack has just started watching it. Let's shoehorn that in. Amazing show. But you'll see even in that show, like that's, I mean, it's fairly accurate. I mean, it's obviously dramatized or whatever. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's kind of like the UK's Wire, based in London with a lot of really cool actors in there that some of them are musicians too. But you'll see just like that culture is kind of like more where I would have gone to school and stuff like that. So yeah, in that world, there's always like you go in the wrong place. Like the amount of times you just go in the wrong place and you just, yeah, you get in trouble for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, so yeah, but I was gonna say just to build on Jack's story, there was one time not in the club, but I did go to. There's a thing called MoMA PS1 here when I first moved there. It's kind of like an outdoor party in a daytime party in Queens, and Boy Better Know and Skepta were playing there, and I was out all day, obviously not in the best of shape, and I had convinced my friend, for some reason we talked about this Indian restaurant in the city called Janoon, which I think at the time was like almost a Michelin star restaurant or something. And after a long day of being out, for some reason we decided we had to go and get this 12-course tasting menu at Indian restaurant. Went there. As soon as we got there, they said, "Hey, you're wearing shorts. You gotta wear like pants for this." So I did a similar thing. I like spoke to one of the waiters, and they took me downstairs, and I borrowed a pair of trousers from the waiters. It was like all of the waiters' like outfits. So I'm just sitting there in these trousers, smashing this food. But sometimes you gotta just charge it to the game, man. You know, don't know.
Improvise.
Stay safe out there. That's the takeaway.
Stay safe out there. Yeah, we've done a lot of banter talk now. Let's get on with the show. Boys, it's been a busy week. We're gonna be talking about the Roman Empire today because that's really the meme of the week. We haven't got a visual meme of the week for this, but we're gonna talk about that. We'll touch on Elon's book. I know Trung has already devoured the whole book like a human GPT. We're gonna take a few takeaways there, and the Autoworker Strikes, and a little breakdown on Garmin, the watch company or the electronic company. GPS. All right. So yeah, why don't we start off with the Roman Empire? I mean, what has been going on? Because I've just seen videos all over the internet where, especially, I mean, I see this on TikTok. I think on Twitter people are talking about it too. But there'll be like a girlfriend goes to a boyfriend or husband and says, how many times a week do you think about the Roman Empire? And they'll be surprised, and the guys will be like, whoa, like probably 3 times a week or something like that. So like that's all I've seen of it. But what else was going on with the Roman Empire stuff? You're probably closer to it.
Let's some background. So there's a I believe it's an Instagram influencer that also had a big TikTok account. I think his name's like something like Roman Flavius, so like very on brand. And he just like tweeted or TikToked or sent a message like, ladies, go ask your mans how often they think about the Roman Empire. I think you'll be surprised. And that was the trend that Bilal described. I'll tell you the most interesting thing about that trend and stuff I all wrote, because every single major outlet wrote about it, right? It's like New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal wrote about it. It's like full coverage by the mainstream media. And I think there's something going on here, right? And we've talked about this in the past. Twitter used to be where like something would pop off on Twitter and it would become a piece of IP for the newspapers to write about, right? Like literally like a tweet interaction. Like, for example, we're talking about Elon. Elon replied to one of my tweets in 2020, something about he thought SpaceX and Tesla had a 10% chance of succeeding. That became a news article for like 20 different publications, right? And I think what's kind of happening, one of the best takeaways I saw, and I forgot who wrote it, so apologies, but they're like, you know what this shows is, A, was this even a TikTok trend? Was it actually a TikTok trend? Or is it somebody on Twitter being like, hey, there's a TikTok trend? It could have been like 5 people, right, that did it. And then the mainstream media is like, well, we hate Twitter and X now, so we will no longer write stories of things that are trending on Twitter and X. And TikTok has a lot more cultural cachet. So we're going to just turn on whatever's trending on TikTok, quote, like trending in quotes is what I'm doing here. And we're going to make that news story. So that's what happened here. And this thing flamed out in like 12 hours, right? It's like what George, actually 2 episodes ago, Soren was talking about. Part of his studying was he's been looking at how quickly memes flame out, right? Like 15 years ago, a meme would last for a month. And then when he came on, he's like, yeah, now it'll last for 6 hours. The Roman Empire was one of those things, up, down, gone, right? It's over. And we're talking about now because whatever, we're recording a couple days later afterwards. But it was obviously different in nature than the superconductor stuff, but very similar vibe, right? It's like, happens,
Yeah,
gone.
completely
Everybody
forgot about
comments.
superconductors now.
So I'd like your
yeah.
guys' thoughts on that of like, yeah, it's more of a meta commentary on what is even viral anymore.
Yeah, Jack, what did you see this on your feeds?
I saw it, but I guess didn't dig into it that much. But there's obviously I think has that little kernel of truth in it that made it just freaking fly on social. That's the only observation that I made at the time. And few people have asked me since then. I think I said once a month was my answer.
Well, describe it. Tell us. Let's walk through it then. Let's each talk about through the answers.
I don't have that much to add other than most of the time it's politics that gets me thinking about it. The Senate. Whenever I see certain words, I'm like, yeah, this has been going on for a long time. You know, how the American...
a little nod to the Roman Empire in your head.
The American justice system is modeled on a very, ancient. A very well documented ancient system.
Lindy.
Yeah.
Well, that would have been a viral TikTok right there if Jack had said, every time I think about politics, the Senate.
Yeah.
Well, boys, look at this. This is Google Trends, Roman Empire, the last 90 days. Look at that. Incredible.
Oh, so it actually was a thing.
Yeah.
This is
it popped off September 10th.
This is chicken and egg situation here, right? Everybody's thinking about it now.
But still, I mean, and it says related queries. You can see here, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Men think about Roman Empire.
Wait, go to the states. I want to see which state.
That's funny. Yeah, Georgia. I don't know how.
Politics.
That's interesting.
The Georgia impeachment. I mean, the lawsuit against Trump. There you go.
That's quite interesting.
Fascinating, dude. This is content. I'm pulling this out, man.
Love that. All right, cool.
So. That's great, dude. I love Jack's answer. The funniest one I saw is I posted it on Twitter. I can share it with Rafa after. There's like this Asian dude on TikTok. He's like, okay, what kind of question is that? What do you mean? How often do you think about the Roman Empire? There's so many empires. He's like, there's a Persian Empire, there's a Mongol Empire, there's a Ming Dynasty. He's like, there's lots of empires. And this guy goes on this rant. But the one I did go in the rabbit hole on was, my whole answer was the Roman versus the Mongol Empire. So if you put them the maps, the Mongol Empire is significantly larger, right? But the argument that you can go down so many Reddit forum rabbit holes about Mongol versus Roman, but here are kind of some takeaways for our listeners to get into internet arguments on. Mongol Empire is about 150 years. Roman Empire in some form was 1,500 years, right? Some form. So Mongol was fast, quick, gone. Right, but
it was a wild one.
Huge. And listen, here's the thing: the Romans invented a lot of shit, right? Like sewage and like bridges and architecture, like the political systems. Mongols didn't necessarily quote unquote invent stuff, but they did create. I mean, their biggest takeaway is they created the conditions for this like across Asia to European trade, because essentially they're like, okay, this is the trade route, like the Silk Road route that the Mongols are going to lay out, because we control everything. If you mess with us, we'll kill you. So here, just trade. And they did kill a lot of people. That's the other thing, right? They're much more savage. Like Dan Carlin has a whole bit.
I just started listening to it last week, actually.
Why don't you tell the listeners what his TLDR about
I'm only on the first episode, but it was just, it's a really good series.
But what was his takeaway, right? He's like, you could look at Genghis Khan as like Hitler, but that's not how we think about it. His whole framing was like, Genghis Khan was this savage, killed this many people. Obviously, the thing I think that does set Hitler, I can't believe we're talking about Hitler on this podcast, but like, it was just like the targeted extermination of a race, right? Or races and like gypsies. It's like, that has always been kind of like what in a lot of people, or 20th century mind, 21st century mind separates him. Although I'd say Stalin, now we're getting deep. But Stalin also targeted a race of people. It wasn't a race; it was a class of people, right? He was like, he targeted the kulaks is like this rich class. It's like, it's as bad in my mind to target a class of people because you're indiscriminately creating a class. Whereas obviously with Jewish people can identify them, but even rope in a larger population. I think that those things are very comparable. But Genghis Khan, which is Dan Collins' argument, is like, it just kind of gets lost. And again, 700 years ago, right? You kind of forget this dude is just a complete savage. And now when you mention Genghis Khan, everybody's just kind of laughing. It's like, oh yeah, Mongols, ha ha ha. And oh, he slept with so many women. And that 1% of like the genetic pool is Genghis Khan. It's like, ha 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 ha, right? Like that's how like 700 years later. Seriously.
So I'm looking at Jack's face.
Insane, man. I'm on. Look at this, boys.
Yeah, let's see.
Fucking Genghis Khan's family tree.
Wow,
look at that tree,
beautiful.
bro.
Diagrammatic family
exactly.
tree.
Bilal's called it beautiful. This is what we're talking about.
No, you might be
I was saying it's beautiful that Jack is on
Genghis
there,
Khan's family tree.
Okay, so Bilal,
Incredible.
let's ask you then. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Honestly, similar. Like, I was actually like not that often, not every week. That sounds very off. Maybe indirectly without realizing, but yeah, probably every few months. Just like the way you described it there, Jack. But I don't, not as often. I did see a lot of comments like, first of all, they're like, is this an American trend? Because I'm not there and I don't think about it as much. And then secondly, the big question was like, are people obviously just making videos as a joke now? Like, because a lot of the answers, there's a guy like, oh, not that often, maybe 4 times a week. And we're like, how's that not often? And then they'll keep digging for the reasons. It's a funny meme either way. It's pretty jokes.
Let me add one. Actually, based on what you just said, I think I saw a very earnest one that is actually hysterical, and it's more hysterical because of something I think we can all relate to. Like, you know, when your partner asks you something, and then like you say you understand it, right? Like you start down the road and then you realize you don't, and then you start fucking backfilling your answer.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Like,
yeah.
I saw this one answer. The guy, so his girlfriend's asking him, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And then he was like distracted. He's like, yeah, all the time. She's like, let's start probing him. He's like, what do you mean all the time? He's like, and then you see him like thinking about how to answer that. He's like, well, the English language is Latin based, and you know, that was from the Roman Empire. He's like, that means you think about it every day. And you can see the gears turning.
It was like a leading question, basically, right? And it's trying to play along. Yeah, very interesting.
I will say Jack nailed it, I think. He's like, kernel of truth is the takeaway for me. There's a kernel of truth in it.
Trung, you shared an article about the marketing lessons from the Roman Empire. Was there any fun anecdotes?
Oh yeah, our boy Adam
that?
Singer. Our boy Adam writes a hot takes Substack. I know Adam listens to a couple episodes. I don't know if he's listening now, but Adam, great article. Great, we pounce on this trend and turn it into content. So he goes
jacking life.
Yeah, so a couple of things he mentioned, which is so he talked about great at branding. Like we mentioned architecture. Obviously, the Romans are known for their military and the political systems. But man, the branding, like the line, all roads lead to Rome. Oh wow! Someone actually did research and found that if you look at the thickness of roads around Europe and you calculate the amount of travel on them, all roads actually did lead to Rome. So like there was like a lot of branding around that, right? It's like political branding, man. It's like, man, Jack knows this. If you say you make a slogan like that, it's like almost self-fulfilling, right? So he said there's a ton of influencer marketing. He's like, you can laugh, but like that's what it was. The gladiators, right? Like that's the thing. I think 99% of people, when you think about Roman Empire, is like, oh man, yeah, Maximus, like Russell Crowe, right? It's like, but that's the thing. The gladiators were the real deal. Those were the big deal during that period of the Roman Empire, and they were sponsored by very wealthy people, and the sport, right? It's like the Olympics are from Greeks, but obviously the Colosseum and the Roman life is very much of this branding, creating of this macho kind of image, right? And
that's a good point.
It's also funny how Rome has superseded Greece in pop culture as like the formation of many things that maybe it didn't initially deliver, but definitely like way more consensus around that as a more influential period of history, right?
Yeah, just took it and ran with it, right? Just took whatever the technology was. It's like Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs saw the multi-touch.
Here's the
Steve
GUI.
Jobs saw his iPod.
So Greek
Oh,
Empire is
okay.
the IBM
BlackBerry.
of
No, it's a BlackBerry.
Is
It's a
iOS
BlackBerry.
of
Greek
BlackBerry,
Empire's
okay.
BlackBerry. Yeah, and Romans are the iPhone. It's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here.
who's the Nokia then? Is that Greece?
No, Nokia would probably be I don't know, man.
Testing that history knowledge.
I can't say it because if I call somebody Nokia, we will get canceled by
There'll be some
some
What
fights,
about
okay.
we could say Britain, can't we, Bilal?
Yeah, we'll call them Britain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
gotta
can say it. And I was Indian back then, but I will take it. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, great point. Go on.
One more marketing one is this is interesting actually. So the interesting about Romans, because the nature of their empire, it was much larger than the Greek empires and previous ones. They were very decentralized. So for our crypto listeners, so decentralization, they would send people to these local communities like North Africa, but integrate with the North Africans. And by melding the two cultures, you're actually spreading your own also. So that was hey, Adam, if you're listening, that one might be a stretch, but I like the lesson.
Yeah. I will say one thing you said about the influencer campaign kind of reminded me of, we did the sports washing episodes about Saudi and the MLS with Messi. And I was thinking about it recently, like the way that the Saudi league is getting these footballers, it feels basically like an influencer campaign, like in a way, because did you see part of the Neymar deal was that he has to post on Instagram and he gets paid the crazy amount?
He gets like 500K a
yeah,
post,
it's
right?
it's like the craziest influencer deal.
Nuts.
It's crazy, and it's just like that is kind of happening at this is like at a state level, obviously.
Oh, dude,
So,
Bilal, you nailed it, man. I'm listening. So the Rest of History has a great podcast. They did it about the Coliseum, and they literally said they did the parallel you did. These are PhDs in history, so you're on the same wavelength.
There we go.
They're like, you guys know about sports washing in the Middle East? That's what they asked. He's like, that's basically what a lot of Romans were doing. The rich Romans were doing back in the day.
Yeah.
They're like, they were making whatever they were up to, which is not good shit, look a lot better to the masses by having these competitions. So perfect.
Incredible. Yeah, so maybe we'll do more on that another time when there's more developments. But yeah, we've covered it on the pod a bit. All right, great chat on the Roman Empire. Let's get on to the Elon book and the Autoworker Strike. I know they're related, obviously, with Tesla. Trunk, I think I'm about 20% into the book, so I haven't
Give me your thoughts. What do you think?
So far, it's decent. Yeah. I mean, I love Walter Isaacson's biographies generally. I've always liked his. I love the Steve Jobs one. He's got a few really, really good ones. This one so far, it started off really good, and now I'm into the part where he's kind of like, because he does his chronologically, right? Like, so it's there's not like as much going back and forth, and there's less creativity.
He doesn't do by
in the
theme,
storytelling.
right? He goes like literally, it's like blow by blow. Here's how it started.
Which the organized part of my brain kind of loves, but the creative part is like, oh, there's maybe a different way to do this, And I remember one thing, this guy I used to work with, who was one of the best creative people I know outside of Jack, and I remember him saying, all stories have a beginning, middle, and end, but they're not always in that order, and it always kind of stuck with me. And that's the thing, when you're reading a book like this, it can feel a little bit like, oh, you're just kind of reading a more detailed Wikipedia
It feels like a history
page.
book, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's good so far. I did love the part where he's bringing the girl with vanilla ice cream. I was like, this guy fucks, Back in the day, he's just going in as a student. But yeah, go. What are you going to say?
No, tell the vanilla ice cream story.
Well, I think it was something along the lines of he was trying to date this girl and he'd organize a date with her, I think. He said, like, let's go get ice cream, which I also love already, like not getting a coffee. It kind of reminds me of Good Will Hunting, where he's like, can we get coffee? And he's like, no, let's get caramels or whatever. It's like, let's get ice cream, slightly different. Who doesn't like ice cream? And then she doesn't turn up. So he basically goes to her house and then speaks to her roommates and finds out what her favorite ice cream is, and it's vanilla. And he goes and gets the vanilla ice cream and turns up at the library or wherever she was.
But he hunts her down and sort of melted, right? Which is hysterical.
Like Rick Burton outside someone's door, he's just like knocking on the window. But yeah, I was like, okay, I kind of respect this. He's someone who's going to get after it. But yeah, what about you? You obviously devoured it in a week. So
yeah, I read it. So I mean, if any of our listeners have read Ashley Vance's book about Elon, that book goes up to 2015. So it's like, but it's very
That was,
similar.
I think I read that one.
Yeah.
That was good as well.
Yeah, they're both good books. It's like you got that covered, right? Like there's not a ton of new stuff. But like Walter went on the Lex Friedman podcast and he actually said specifically, Bilal, to your point, he's like, I like writing chronologically. So he's done books on Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, which invented CRISPR, the gene editing technique, and Benjamin Franklin. And he said, and I thought this was very insightful and makes sense, but I never really thought about it. Isaacson's like, I like to write the way Bilal described it, from A through Z, birth all the way to adulthood, because I need to show the growth of the individual and how previous things influenced their future things. And that was a big takeaway for me from the book. Like I'd known a bit about Elon's like upbringing, like very difficult upbringing.
That stuff's quite insightful, actually.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
I've
dude, like-
heard like pockets of it, but like again, without spoiling too much, his dad and his relationship was pretty tough.
His dad's he's not a good dude. His dad is not
exactly.
a good person.
It comes across like that in the book anyway, and so that sort of stuff. I was telling you, I was reading a lot about this childhood stuff, like impact on adults. That's something I've been reading a lot more about, and you just start seeing it everywhere. You're like, oh, that person's acting in this way because when they're a kid, their dad wasn't there, and then they're trying to make up for it, and it just becomes this big like therapy session in the real world. But kind of.
Listen up right now. I love that you brought it up.
Yeah.
No, I love that you brought that up because David Senra, David listens to every episode. So David, I'm borrowing this from you. Is in a lot of his podcasts, David frequently says Francis Ford Coppola has a quote: "The story of the father is embedded in the son." So you can tell a lot from the child, right?
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at entrepreneurs, it's true. Steve Jobs never formally met his biological father, put up for adoption. He found out later in life that he had met him, but he didn't realize it was his dad. And he said, I was very unimpressed by him. And part of his drive, in a way, is almost like as a FU, like, oh, you're abandoning me. You're leaving me to be adopted. I'm going to show you, right? Jeff Bezos, his biological father, did not raise him. Similarly driven, right? It's like Isaacson mentions Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was abandoned by his father because he was illegitimate. His father, the biological father, later did bring him into the home, but same, right? He's like, blah. He says like, when you start looking at people, and like two from the Founders podcast series, two really stand out. It's Tiger Woods, whose father was quite verbally abusive to push him.
I've seen the documentary,
right? Yeah. It's like, I mean, I'll give you an example of how bad it is. And Bilal, if you have any other stories, I'd love to kind of add on to it. But it's like the one that really stuck with me with Tiger Woods. Earl Woods knew he wanted to make his son what Tiger Woods became. He actually thought in his mind that he could help race relations by making a black, a half black individual the best golfer in the world. Somehow, like, because golf is a very Caucasian sport.
White sport, yeah.
Yeah. But he would, like, his 5-year-old son, 5-year-old Tiger, would be at the range hitting balls, and his dad would be calling him the N-word, like yelling it.
That's wild,
and like
right.
pretending to be somebody in the crowd to like scare him. And then Tiger said it was like he wanted to cry, but he didn't want his dad to see him cry. So like he would just steal up and play. It was like, this is like the psychological abuse.
A 5-year-old,
right?
can you imagine? Like a 5-year-old is going through that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But actually, to build on what you said, the one I remember was similar at the golf course, because obviously a lot of the stories are based on him being on a golf course with his dad. But he would just keep him out there all day, and then he would be going on the side having these affairs with women, like at the golf course, basically. And he kind of grew up like seeing that. And again, without going into all the details of the story, it's just like that's going to like mess with someone's head, right? Like it will mess with me as an adult seeing your dad do that. But if you're a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, and then obviously what happened with Tiger later in his life, you saw him becoming, this womanizer or whatever you want to call it, but kind of in the secret, right? Like, because on the surface, it looked like he was this perfect family man, and on the side, he was just going in, so it's just like...
Story of the father is embedded in the son, man.
That's it, man. So that we could do a whole episode on that, because that
deep,
is
right?
Deep.
So I'll say this about Elon Musk, Elon's father. So a couple myths that need to be debunked. First of all, Elon was not like man, like this shit pisses me off so much on Twitter. It's just like like, you know what? You don't have to agree with everything Elon does. I understand that. You don't have to like Elon. At least read the truth and find out what it is, right? Like, don't be basing your opinion off a Business Insider headline. You should read this book. Read the first chapter. It's not a big lift. It's like 20, 30 minutes. And Isaacson is also a very extremely reputable reporter / journalist, and put in his legwork, right? So like, yes, Elon grew up in apartheid South Africa, but his father was an anti-apartheid political candidate and actually beat a pro-apartheid one. This was not a pro-apartheid family, right? This is they were not a racist family. And the other thing that from the book, Bilal, you probably remember this, like apartheid South Africa, extremely violent.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Elon
There's
and his
one of
brother
him going
and
to the
sister,
concert.
we're seeing dead bodies. Like, they just see dead bodies on the street. Like, this was like South Africa. South Africa today is quite violent, right? It's imagine in the 70s and the 80s, they're just seeing dead bodies on the street. Like I think they opened the story with they're going to an anti-apartheid concert, and literally like on the way there, there's just somebody with a knife in his head, and they stepped in a pool of blood.
It's wild.
So like quite serious, right? And like Elon was because they saw that he's a little bit gifted as a child. They tried to get him a couple grades ahead. So he was 2-3 years younger, wasn't super social. I mean, he's self-diagnosed Asperger's. He said he didn't have very many friends. So he's getting the shit kicked out of him by people 2-3 years older. And and then his father eventually sent him to, it sounded like a boarding school. He went to a boarding school where kids were dying at the boarding school. So like, this is not, like we're talking about like Tiger getting yelled at and seeing his dad doing those stuff at that age, like the trauma that creates. This is the environment that Elon was growing up in. And his father had ups and downs of wealth.
Because I think he was a businessman too, right? And I think that's what a lot of similar to what you said, I think the frustrating thing is a lot of people will just, because he's kind of become a political figure now, they will just discount the good he has done, like in business world anyway. And they'll just say stuff like, oh, but he inherited a crazy amount of money, or he, came here with lots of privilege, whatever the word is you want to use. And
neither is true, by the way. Neither is true.
And I think there's exactly. So that was the thing. I think because the dad might have had some money at one point and then other times had no money, you can kind of create a narrative that you want. So anyway, really, really, I'm going to definitely finish it. I'm enjoying it so far, but worth.
Well, let me just draw the
read.
line. Like, not a spoiler. I'll draw a line, and I love Jack's thoughts about anything I've said. Is like, so. Isaacson has a very specific line, and a lot of people that he spoke to is like, so at that early age, Elon, to deal with, constant fear, like, your the adrenaline, right? He's always on defense, like ready for some type of fight, whether that's a verbal abuse from his father or a physical fight at school. Like, he's always on alert mode, right? Like the fight or flight. He's always in that mode. So he learned to live and operate in that mode from a young age and actually like work well, right? And he also, Einstein describes it, he turns off fear. Like, he literally just turns off emotion. So what that means though is a couple things. And the problem with these type of narratives is like, it's kind of easy just to be, oh, A, you see A happen, C. It's like, is it really a straight line? I actually see, again, this is a narrative. It is the story of someone's life, and it is easy to draw the lines. But I think this is a case where you can make that. But like, by turning off fear, he's also turning off everything else that comes with emotions, joy, empathy. Like, Elon doesn't celebrate anything. It's just on to the next. What's next? What's next? What's next? Right?
And in relationships too, if you look at
in relationships too, right?
Like that empathy you need with the partner and stuff as well.
There's a line in the book where towards the end, one of his buddies asked him, his close confidants, like, do you need to buy Twitter? Like, you've had multiple, like you've had when Tesla almost went bankrupt and SpaceX at the same time around the financial crisis, or in 2018 when you're ramping up Model 3 and the production hell, you slept 2 hours a night. He's like, could you do that again? Elon just looked at him. He's like, I think I could do another 5-year run of one of those, right? It's like, he literally says, it's like, when there's this live or die mode is what motivates him the most. Is like, when he's not in that mode, is like, he's not as motivated. And so see that in a lot of his adventures, super risky, right? He's like,
they're all in. They're
everything's all in. highly risky, low odds of success. Everyone's telling him it can't be done, but he's not thinking like that. He's just shut down that. He's just like, he's going to do it. It's very difficult to read this book and not admire how much pain he put himself through to bring Tesla and SpaceX to existence. I mean, they would have died on multiple occasions. And we're talking about the most successful people in tech, like guys like Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, Mike Morse from Sequoia. They're all like, this guy's crazy. They're like, the shit that he's doing is insane. Like, this is the most accomplished investors in the area, and all they deal with are A types, 99 percentile people, and they're like, this guy's a different animal. They're like, this guy is on a completely different playing field, right? So I think I'll bring it back to, like, I think it's because of this environment he grew up in. It's like it steeled him to these things. And that's my takeaway. We don't have to get into this other stuff. Like Tesla, SpaceX.
I wanted to make a comment about that. But curious, Jack, if you had any thoughts as well, mate. I know we were talking for a bit there.
I haven't read it yet, boys, but I'm going to. Okay. That was a good summary. Don't let me muddy the great ending that Trung left it on. The only thing I was going to add, one thing beyond just the Elon part, was what we talked about earlier about the childhood stuff and people. It basically creating, in these cases we talked about, successful, in air quotes, people, right? Like we're seeing the one side. We're obviously not seeing all the people that had fucked up lives, became addicts, had terrible relationships. Like all the 90% of people can end up like that as well. And the other thing I'll say is specifically is something I've had to reframe a little bit for myself, especially with Creator Lab, where I've interviewed a lot of successful, in air quotes, entrepreneurs. All of them have some form of this. Like, it doesn't always have to be, I've seen a shank in someone's head in South Africa, but there is this like chip on the shoulder in pretty much all of the people that I've interviewed. And what I've found is the ones I've ended up respecting the most, and the ones I've kind of become friends with where I could, because I've actually really gone with them, was they were kind of emotionally evolved beyond just that first initial success drive. And what I mean by that is, those people, some people we should admire for certain things, but what I've realized over time is like they're really, really, really good at being entrepreneurs. They're really, really, really good at making money. That doesn't mean they're really, really good at life and being in a relationship, being a healthy person, you know, all the other things that you want to do in your life over a long marathon of a life. And there's a lot of them eventually get to that stage where they're looking at like, oh, well, I just sold a company for 100 mil. Now what? Oh, and now I need to do the next one. Now I need to do the next one. A lot of them step back and realize like, okay, this is one part of my life, and I'm just constantly trying to fill up this void. And where is this void coming from in the first place? And that's where kind of that deeper work kind of begins. And so, that's the only thing I want to add.
What's the Naval quote? What Naval says something along the lines, if you want to trade your life with somebody, you have to trade the good and the bad, right? It's like, don't wait, Jack, is kind of the thrust of it? Is like,
it's like if you want to swap places with somebody, but you wouldn't like swap places entirely, like swap their entire life. Like, you're looking at a single outcome, and, you know, envy occurs over whatever outcome. Let's say, someone builds a successful business, everything they had to sacrifice and the position they're in personally to have done that. You don't see that, but if you wanted that outcome, you'd have to have that
trade it all
situation
in,
too.
Well, Elon says in the book, I mean, he's said it before, and it's mentioned in the book, but he's like, somebody asked him at a Indonesian business summit, he's like, how can we make the next Elon? And he just goes, you know, be careful what you ask for. Like, I don't know if you want to be me. He's like, he goes, I torture myself like to an insane degree, frankly. And it's true. Like, the dude's an animal. Actually, let's move on to the next part, which was the auto strike.
Autoworker strike.
I'll frame it with this. So, having said everything, let's just lay out what Elon has accomplished. So, SpaceX, when they launched that rocket, the Falcon 1 in 2008, on his fourth try with his team into space, into orbit, they were the first privately built rocket ever to go to space. Before that, nation states, USSR, United States, China, with like 1,000,000 times the resources, had done that, right? So just objectively insane. Tesla, purpose obviously is to usher in renewable energy for society, sustainable renewable energy. They're also the first mass manufacturing car company in 100 years not to go bankrupt. So two of the most impossible things you could have done, he did them at the same time. How many people could have done one of those things? Like we're talking less than 5, maybe. To do 2, he's one of one. Nobody else could have done both.
Yeah.
So
Respect.
we'll line that up for the next thing. So Bilal, can you line up?
Yeah, let's talk about Autoworker Strikes. I've not read too much on it because I was kind of away for the last week. So yeah, why don't you just tee up what's actually been happening? Because I know it obviously relates to Tesla and electric cars and stuff as well.
Okay, so let me tee it up, but then I want to ask Jack about his auto and how much of it relates to him, how much
and that factory life. Yeah,
of the factory life. So United Auto Workers. Bilal, can you double check if UAW stands for that? The acronym. Sorry, man. That's the U.S. union for 150,000 auto workers at the big car companies. Ford,
United Auto Workers.
Yeah. Okay. So what is it? Ford, Stellantis, and Chrysler. Is it Ford, Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, and a GM are the 3 big auto manufacturers in the United States. So last Thursday, their existing deal went kaput. And I don't know if you have the tweet up there, but on the demands that they made. So they have new demands. These are the demands. Okay. United Auto Workers proposal, a 40% increase in hourly pay over 4 years. That pay is supposed to equal what the CEO pay has gone up to. Reduced 4-day, 32-hour work week, faster path to top pay, cost of living adjustments, 5+ weeks of vacation, and a shift in the retirement plan. Now, these are pretty big asks. And the TLDR is a lot of this is framed because of the electric vehicle revolution, right? I think in a decade, we can expect 30 to 50% of cars to be electric vehicles. And as a lot of us probably know, and we've talked about in this episode, electric vehicles have a lot fewer parts than internal combustion engines, which means a lot fewer jobs, objectively speaking. So Tesla has really automated a lot of its plants. So it seems quite prepared for a world where labor costs are high. And, Tesla is in the crosshairs around this in the sense of they're ununionized. But 2-3 decades before, the major 3 automakers in the United States also faced a threat from Toyota, Japan, which is also ununionized labor. So the argument is basically the argument that UAW is making is like, don't let these car makers take all the money. Like there's tons of profits to be had. Guys like Elon are just pocketing everything. And the argument they make is, I think the UAW employee gets $60 an hour, including benefits, whereas Tesla is 40. But then you forget that Tesla also includes stock options for their employees. Some employees from if you stayed from the early 2010s, you're a millionaire now. Not to say that's the outcome for a lot, but that's how Elon is aligning at Tesla. So I'll throw this to Jack on your thoughts. How much is this? I don't know how similar this is to London and UK, but curious about, you've been in that car factory life, and you've also probably seen, I think you mentioned in the past, like when those car manufacturer jobs change, what happens to those communities. So love your kind of 360 thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I worked for Honda for close to a year before I went to university. And that was I think it employed 5,000 people in the town I grew up in. So it was probably biggest, if not second biggest. There's also a massive building society there. Nationwide, do you remember that?
Oh,
Bilal?
there we go. Nationwide, yeah.
Nationwide HQ is in,
it's like
might
a bank,
still be in Swindon.
Yeah, it's a special type of bank, basically.
So basically, every other person you would meet would either work at Nationwide or Honda, right? And the Honda jobs, for the most part, were production line. So I can't even remember how much I got paid there. It was better than any other
student job.
A lot of people, would work there for their
funds
career.
For you. It beats funds for you or whatever, yeah.
And it's I got a job through a talent agency thing, like a recruitment agency thing. You go in there, you sit there for a week, you do your training, and then you're on one process at a time. So the way they built the cars, I believe it's 400 or 500 processes, they call it. And each one of those is 70 seconds long. So there's one person working on that. So there's a car rolling off the production line every 70 seconds. And there's 400 people between, they as far as I understand it, they received a raw roll of metal, and a Honda Civic comes out the other end. So this is not complete, like assembly in one place. Like I think as far as car manufacturing goes, like 90% of it was happening on site there, like turning the raw materials into the cars, like pressing the panels and stuff. Pretty incredible. And getting that to run smoothly. We used to have these attendance bonuses where, like, if you turn up 10 seconds late one day, I think it was like 5-10% of your weekly pay would be docked.
What? Because you're slowing down the entire line.
They're saying you're costing us 30 grand a minute. That's how that's what they said, because that's what the retail price of cars. Obviously, that's not, I don't know how accurate that is. But the work was not, like, I remember thinking even then, and this is 2009 or something, is like a lot of it was automated and you're just kind of moving something in place, like you're basically there to like machine assist something in, whether that's like a air gun or like a rack that holds a piece that you guide up. I'm sure it's like the cost benefit in that is like, to automate this one part of the process would cost us 10 million pounds, or we can pay these two geezers to turn up every day for the next 15 years, right? They're not thinking at like the scale that they need to be thinking. Obviously an incredible company. Honda, I think, it's Toyota that kind of pioneered car manufacturing and came over to the States and taught a bunch of
just-in-time car manufacturing.
Just-in-time,
like I remember just being blown away by it. Obviously, it's absolutely incredible that this stuff comes together, but at the same time, it was like, wow, there's so many dependencies along this where, like, if I bugger something up, they used to have this thing where if you make a mistake, they would obviously stop the line and you fix the mistake, but then they would have people checking cars at the end. And then if one car has anything wrong with it, they would check 5 cars either side. Then if they found another mistake, 5 cars either side of that.
Oh, damn.
And we used to ship them out of Bristol to wherever. And sometimes they would have to take coach loads of people to the dock because they found something wrong. And they have to go and inspect all of these cars. And it was because, like, they didn't foresee something, or you had like a new person on there missing a bolt on every car for 200 cars, like a whole day.
Oh my God, dude.
It's just like a robot does not make that mistake, right?
Yeah,
and you're going to find, then trying to find which ones.
Yeah.
And the QA is like very, like these recalls that happen is like a lot of it must come from stuff like that. Whereas like somebody had a bad day or wasn't taught properly or just forgot. And the weird thing about it is when you're in that environment, you're not really awake until you make a mistake or something goes wrong.
Oh, you're just total autopilot.
Just like complete flow state, like you pick up the thing, bang, 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 bang. And then when the screw like snatches or something, you're like, where am I? What's going on?
Yeah, Are you allowed to listen to music?
No.
The Matrix.
Dude, that sounds not great work.
Oh, it was savage. It was like you putting 400 exhausts on a car every day.
What was your particular job? Do you remember? Or was it change?
I was in this like one little section. So we did exhaust, rear suspension. I did the splash guard on the bottom of the car for a while, which is like 20 bolts. That was a horrible job, man. You have this like wobbly piece of plastic. You pull it off a rack, go and stick it on the bottom, and then you're like putting 20 bolts in there.
That
was mental,
sick.
man.
It's amazing you did that job, man. That's so good.
Oh, it was fun, man. And you know what my favorite thing about Honda was? The subsidized canteen.
Oh, there we go.
Japanese curry for lunch every day.
There we go.
Pork curry, the pork katsu.
Exactly.
A little katsu life.
Yeah.
Little
katsu
sweet potato
curry.
thrown in.
Breakfast baps. Nice little bacon rolls. The old jumbo sausage. Oh, incredible.
Wait, Jack. And this is when, like, 5 p.m. on Friday, you're taking a direct flight to Ibiza.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Magaluf.
You and the boys. Direct flight.
We used to do, what was the shifts there? It was like, they were really odd shifts. It was like 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., I think, or 4 to 10. I can't remember the exact split, but it was like early morning to mid-afternoon and then mid-afternoon to late night. So when you're on the late night, and it would be like week on, week off. So the late night shifts, you're like, you don't have really anything going on, especially when you're like And when I was in my early 20s, I just slept until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then went to work. So it was like one week would just be gone. And then the week after that, you'd be off.
Were you a student as well?
Early.
This is before uni? Or
It was before. I just got accepted into uni. So I was doing a bunch
it was like
of stuff.
summer or something?
And it was just before I got in, before I went in September to uni. So
Got to
I started
stack up
earlier in
them
the year.
peas so you can buy
That's
your
what-
Jaeger bombs at uni.
Exactly.
I don't know how many peas were stacked with these weekly trips to Ibiza, man.
Man, life was a lot cheaper back then, man. I mean, I remember basically I would just zero out my student loan in the summer, you know? I can't remember what I used to get, but that was the job. I was just trying to get to zero
Break
by
even.
September. That was
That's
my
smart
goal.
though. That's a great way to do it.
Wait, Bilal, you need to explain for non-British listeners what the P stands for and stacking them peas.
Peas.
What does the
It's
P
funny. Do you
stand
know what's
for?
funny? Because there's a
What does the
I've
P
always
stand for?
I don't even know if it stands for pounds or if it's something else. But I remember what's it called? It could be it could be pesos. You know what I mean? Could be any currency
Paper.
thrown in. Paper,
yeah.
that's what it is. That's what it is. Sorry, when there was a famous song, Kano, we'd reference him once a month on the pod. Also in Top Boy, Sully, he had a famous song, P's and Q's, which comes from the phrase "be on your P's and Q's," and that's an older phrase that isn't necessarily just about like money in this case, but. For a long time, people would be debating what the P's and Q's standing for. And I remember one guy at school doing A-levels. He was like, yeah, it stands for pounds and coins. And I'm like, what? Pounds and coins? With a Q for coins. And I'm like, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
It's manners, isn't it? It's got something to do with good manners, but I don't know what the origin is.
Yeah, it's like be on your, exactly.
Be on your best behavior.
Best behavior, yeah. Also,
Wait,
incredible
so,
song. But
Jack,
yeah.
let me ask you something. Related to this car manufacturer. So the big thing with EVs, right? A lot less parts. I don't know what the numbers. I think it's like a 10th of the number of parts, right? Because you don't have an engine.
You're putting that massive battery on there, and then
that replaces probably 20 parts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that stuff is also just like you get in a Tesla and it feels like it's just like 4 bits glued together.
Yeah.
And it's like the bottom. Put the seats in, put the top on. Obviously, it doesn't go that way, but like even a Honda Jazz or something, it's like the amount of complex stuff in there. The other thing with sorry to ramble on this, but the like interior specs on some of these cars, like it was crazy the amount of customization that you're doing, even at like Honda on a car that is, you're not like buying a Bentley and stitching your initials in the headrest, right? But people are there's still 20 different trim levels. There's like the SE, the SE Plus, the Executive, and the difference is like, there's a little bit more black plastic around the bottom of this, or the dashboard's got like a little red line along it. And all of that stuff is like on a different build sheet on the front of every car. Whereas Tesla is like, we're going to ship 1 million of the same ones. And then the screen in the middle, you can choose what color the lights are that come out of the side of the car.
Well, that's the recall, right? If there's a Tesla recall, it's called a software update.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big thing. It's like
Crazy.
There aren't a lot of parts. And I mean, Jack, just first principle walk through it, right? The cost advantage that Tesla will have if I'm not saying whether or not the UAW deserves the raise for their union members. I'm saying if they increase labor costs by 40%, and you're going into EVs, which have a lot less parts. And then Tesla remember, they start from ground up. They're automating as much as possible. That's not a winnable game.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it for sure. That the last week at home, Celia's been talking about, she listened to the CEO of Ford on Armchair Expert.
Jim Farley?
The guy's name. Yeah, she is like super impressed with his story and like how he's thinking about Ford. And the takeaway I had from it, she was telling me that he's like, we need to focus on our icons, like we need to do the Mustangs, the Broncos, the GT40s, all that's like, we're like basically a nostalgia company. We make massive trucks versus like trying to compete with, I haven't listened to the podcast, so I might be misquoting this, but it felt to me like a very big departure from like we're trying to clone what Tesla is, right? And start building these like, cars for the Allbirds crowd.
By the way,
but you appreciate that. That's Lindy, right? You're using the IP. We always talk
Yeah,
about
it's a very
IP.
different. Yeah, it's a very different approach. Like they're obviously kind of compete. Well, they both make cars, but in a way, it feels like almost like fashion companies where the car you drive makes a statement about your personality or your identity or whatever, and leaning into that if you can't win the other game feels like an interesting move to me, you know?
We'll never forget the best-selling car in the United States for the last 35 years, the Ford F-150.
F-150, man. Yeah, and like that to like start making like competing with the Nissan Leaf or something, it's just like you're throwing away your advantage in many ways, or you're kind of fighting against the momentum that you've created for yourself, or not leaning into the, I don't know, maybe there's some analogy here with even like Apple, right? It's like we just keep churning out this. We've been making the same phone for 5 years, and every single time we release it, there's 1,000 people waiting outside the door to get it. You're not trying to bend the phone in half or like have the screen on the back or like make the camera bend around. Like they're just, yeah, we got the formula. People loving it. We'll make it a bit better, a bit faster,
Add a few
bit
megapixels.
cleaner.
Yeah.
And just keep churning it out. I think
I
that's.
don't know if you guys ever. Sorry, I was just saying. Have you ever guys seen the Gigapress? This is when full Tesla automation.
Gigapress.
Go Google the Gigapress. So this is the peak. There's a story in Isaacson's book. Sick. So I'll just tell the story. But basically, they're pressing, because Jack mentions like it felt like a Tesla is like 4 parts, and then you put some seats in. This is basically it. They're pressing the raw material into these parts that before would have been like 300 different parts. They're just pressing it, die casting it. And the way it was told in Walter Isaacson's book was Elon was looking at a toy Tesla. So when you buy a Tesla, they give you a toy of a Model 3, and he just kind of opened it. And he looked at the inside. It was just one piece, right? Because obviously when you press a toy, you're pressing one piece of metal. And he just goes, can we do this for the car? They're like, what do you mean? He's like, can we press this size for the car? They went to a bunch of industrial manufacturers. Every one of them says you're crazy. This is Elon's story, right? They found one in Italy. They're like, yeah, we'll do it for you. So they built these freaking presses, which are like the size of, I can't tell you how big they are. They're probably the size of like a Starbucks.
Now it doesn't look crazy. It's probably like 8 cars, the footprint of it.
Oh yeah, again, not that huge, but like the it's like 16,000 tons of pressure or whatever it is to press the metal into the parts. But basically, the next leg of this, so they're doing this for Model Ys already, the frame of the which is the crossover. They're thinking about if they go one level. So this is the lineup. Model Y is a crossover. The X is the largest vehicle. The Model 3 is the sedan, which is one I have. The Model S is a luxury sedan. They want to do one that's $25,000 car, which would be like basically the Corolla. And they think they can press the entire thing. The entire car. They're trying to make it so they can press it all. So, dude, you're talking about a line with like what Jack described, one dude shooting in like 20 bolts, and then there's 400 other steps. They want to press the entire thing.
Well, so you know what? The quote that we haven't pulled up, the factory is the product.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dude,
that
100%.
idea, when you think about that in contrast to the strike, I think that is really frames the issue in a very profound way. Is I don't know, the interesting thing I'm assuming about the culture at somewhere like Tesla is being incentivized to do things in a more efficient way because you have this infinite horizon for expansion too. Where like in other situations, there might be a better way to do something, but that might make me redundant. And in certain company cultures, maybe I will not be appreciated for pointing out my redundancy. And maybe that is the case at Tesla too, but I'm assuming that attitude is more celebrated at a place like that, right? Where you want the people that know how the cars are made and have contributed that to create leverage for themselves and remain in position to create even more leverage. But maybe that's not how it goes. But it also the writer's strike is a good tee up
Analogy.
too.
Yeah.
Automation in manufacturing, and obviously
AI with the writer stuff.
AI with
You know what?
work.
We're going down this thing, and I'm getting so like I think this auto stuff. I think we should skip Garmin, just going deep on this.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you guys. So let me give you a quote to what Jack just said. So this is Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, founder of Oracle, fourth richest person in the world right now, by the way.
That's crazy, man.
The way Larry Ellison did it, but it's insane.
Oracle. It's just nuts.
It's
yeah.
So that company, obviously, they did database management, right? Like that was the thing. And if you're wondering how he's so rich, Larry Ellison, well, didn't need a lot of venture or as much in the 70s, but over the past decade, Oracle has been doing so many buybacks with their cash. His equity position in his own company, which rarely ever happens, has gone up by like 10%. So this guy
of multi-billion-dollar,
he's the fourth rich. Like, could you think about that? We know he's rich. You know Larry Ellison's rich. To be the fourth richest guy in the world, it's insane.
Oracle's a $300 billion company. I didn't even know.
So you guys have thought. I mean, we've talked about it in the past. It's like once Oracle's in the your corporation, your 5,000 person corporation, it ain't going anywhere. You're not pulling that system out, right? But anyways, a couple of things about Larry Ellison and Elon, which is interesting, is Larry Ellison was Steve Jobs' best friend. They both hated Bill Gates. They loved
and kind of a mentor too. I think he said
mentor to Steve Jobs. They're boys, and Larry Ellison has only ever been on two boards outside of Oracle. It's Tesla and Apple. So he clearly sees Steve Jobs or like something about Elon, right? And he's much older than Elon. He's like 20, 25 years older than Elon. So he's a big investor in Tesla, has a board seat in Tesla. During when those leaked text messages of the Twitter deal happened, one of the funny ones was Elon messaging Larry's like, I'm going to take a Twitter private. Can I get an investment? and Larry's just like, what do you want? He's like, and I think Elon writes back 1 or 2. And then that's it. 1 or 2 meaning billions. Like, this is like the conversation these guys are having, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2. Dude, think about the level you're at. When you tell somebody maybe 1 or 2 means $1 or $2 billion. But
when was the last time you said 1 or 2? When you got asked how many bagels you want in the morning, or what? You know what I mean? Right? The different context.
What Larry Ellison said. Ellison said they both had OCD. He goes, OCD is one of the reasons for their successes because they obsess on solving a problem until they did. But then here's the difference. He says, the difference between Musk and Jobs is that Musk was a manufacturing obsessive. And he goes, Jobs, obviously design genius, never went to China to look at the manufacturing, never went to Taiwan to look at the manufacturing. Elon lives on the manufacturing floor. And to echo what Jack said, this is Ellison's final part. He goes, the brain strain of designing the car is tiny compared to the brain strain of designing the factory. So he's like, that's what set Elon apart. And like, if you read the book, the biggest difference actually with Ashley Vance's book, which ends in 2015, is you read about Elon's production hell when they try to ramp up the Model 3. This dude was sleeping at the factory for months. And he was, Jack, you will love this, because he's literally walking the factory floors, going to different parts, and he would just look. It's like, why are we doing this way? How many bolts is that? 6? Can it be 2? He's like, he does it. He's like, it can be 2. I want this 2. Is like, this needs to be done differently. And what you mentioned about the incentive, so there's something called the algorithm at Tesla and SpaceX. This is actually one of the big takeaways from the book too. Is like Isaacson mentions the algorithm ad nauseum. He says everyone at Tesla knows what the algorithm is. Everyone at SpaceX knows what the algorithm is. And this is Elon learned this during the production hell of 2018 for Tesla. So it's 5 parts. I'm going to list off the 5 parts and explain to you. Actually, Jack, I would really love your input on this based on your experience in manufacturing. So his parts are, number 1, make the requirement less dumb. Number 2, try to delete the process. Number 3, simplify or optimize. Number 4, accelerate. And number 5 is automate. So the reason he put number 5 is automate is he actually did the opposite when he started Tesla. He goes, we need to automate everything. But what he learned was he was automating steps. Because remember, now his first one is make the requirement less dumb. He was automating dumb steps. He was like automating something that never should have been automated
in the first place.
What was the language on the last one again?
make the last one is called automate. He just said automate.
Oh, just automate. Okay.
So he actually did.
You're right. Like
reverse.
if you've got a bunch of processes that shouldn't be there in the first place, elimination is more important.
Dude.
Yeah.
So he has this great. So step 3 is simplify and optimize. He says the reason why it's step 3 and not step 1 is this. He goes, engineers love to simplify stuff, except they simplify stuff that shouldn't even exist, right? Like he's like, you need to get rid of all the shit that doesn't exist. So step 1 is make the requirement less dumb. And he has a great example. He's like, he was walking the Tesla line and somebody's like, why are we doing this? He's like, oh, like my boss told me. He's like, and he goes to the boss. He's like, why are we doing this? He's like, and then the guy didn't actually know. And it turned out some intern, like a summer intern years ago, had been like read about some efficiency thing and like added to the process. So he's like, wait, we're doing this because some intern said it. And so he goes, from now on, any step in Tesla's manufacturing process has to have someone's name on it. Because if you just give it to division or you say, oh, a product manager says it, there's no accountability. He's like, I want the person's name on it. And I mean, there's a threat there, right? I'm going to fire you if this is dumb. And he's just like, but Apple has the same thing. Apple has something called like the most responsible individual, as in every key decision is a single individual. You guys remember Antenna Gate when iPhone 4 came out and the antenna was busted? They fired one of their top executives because you own that. You own that thing.
It, yeah.
Yeah. So Elon's like, get rid of the dumb requirement because an intern might have done it. Delete. You'll appreciate that. He's like, delete everything. Delete everything that doesn't need to be there. We don't want to automate things that shouldn't even exist. So he says you have to delete to the point where you're adding back 10% stuff you're deleting. You should over delete, and then you only know that if you're adding stuff back to the process. So anyways, that's called the algorithm.
I was just going to say what else is contributing to that too is that's on the manufacturer and the product side versus I can imagine those priorities are different in different places where the product takes precedent or the number of variations we need to add to the product has to be accommodated by manufacturing, versus this like top down, both of these things work together. I can't remember the language of this quote, but the product mentality is like, we're trying to make the most fun car in the world or something. It's like a really simple statement about what Tesla is supposed to be. I forget, but that to me is like, another advantage is, man, just thinking about those two things as a single organism versus two, which in all types of businesses that happens, right? It's just where there be the like creative, conceptual, come up with the idea and then sort of push it over to be figured out by people with a different skill set. And I guess the higher up you have somebody that understands the nuance between two of those things and has like ultimate agency, the more it can, the better it can come together.
No, that's a great point. So one thing he does is the designer is exactly to your point. The designers and engineers are on the floor together. He puts a design desk right like as close to the manufacturing line as possible. He's like, if you're designing a part, you need to see how it's happening in the process. Whereas to your point, a lot of these legacy automakers, the design guy
in a different country sometimes.
Different country.
Yeah.
Sending you a freaking whatever the PSD file is, right? The Photoshop file or an InDesign file. But the last thing I'll add on this is I don't know. So by the time this comes out, it'll be Wednesday. So about a week into the strike. I don't know what the resolution will be. The last things I'm sure they'll get some of what they want. Something I did read about is a game theory involved. If you're an auto manufacturer, you might just give in to this thing, give them the higher wage, knowing that in 5 years, you're going to have all the operating leverage because you're going to automate as much as factory as possible. So, and you obviously have a much longer time horizon than the unions. And again, I have no true opinion either way. I'm just looking at the business field. And if you're going up against a fully automated plant, like that's going to be tough to compete against. The other thing I'll say is, reading about the nitty gritty of the strike is pretty interesting, like the strategy. So they have about $800 million fund that's from the union dues. So they were going to shut down every factory everywhere. But they realized if they did that, they only had 2 months to pay everyone, the 150,000 employees, right? So like, they're like, okay, how do you cause pain to the the car company to get what you want without blowing that fund. So they're starting now at all three manufacturers, which is rare. You usually do it one at a time. Like GM, you start with GM, you cut a deal, and then you go to Chrysler or Stellantis. You be like, hey, listen, we got a deal. But they did it all three, which is very hard to coordinate. But to make it fair, so like no one really fell behind, they all started on the same vehicle type. I think they all went at the SUV level, and then they kept a chip in their they kept a chip, which is the ace of spades, which is they didn't hit the Escalade, which is the most profitable car for GM, and they didn't hit the F-150 yet. But they're like, it's like that's the next card to play, right? Like that's
what are the
next
margins? Do you know, Trump?
Strike on.
On
I don't
those
know what
cars?
they're definitely the top for them. I'd imagine it's like 20-30%. I'd imagine that's what it is, but that's quite that's top.
What's like the operating profit of GM, or do you know?
Margin on I think it's 10 to 15%.
So they can afford to do it. But the interesting thing too is like, does the retail price of how do you respond to that? Do you put up the price of the cars, or you just like, it's like a very tricky.
Yeah. Do you run it through? So they make a gross profit of 10,000 a vehicle. That's an absolute number though. 13. So the entire organization is 13%. So I'd imagine the F-150 is closer to 15 to 20.
So anything they do to accommodate that, like just looking at it objectively, will instantly affect the value of the company just based purely on the math of we have to shell out X amount more, and if we're not changing PEV. If you're doing PE, this is another Elon thing is like, what is it? Confusing desirability and affordability. You've seen that talk they did?
No, I didn't see that.
He's like, you can make a product that loads of people want, but if they can't afford it, it doesn't matter. Like it's such a ridiculously simple thing to say, but he's like, the difference between a $35,000 car and a $30,000 car in the number of people who will buy it is making up massively for the difference in price. It's like you're pursuing scale from this very, this point of view that's much higher up, right? Like if you're going to add $5,000 to the cost of an Escalade, you're not going to sell more Escalades, but you might keep people employed for a couple of years, right? I guess that just looking at it from that scale, like $1,000 off a car, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 is this enormous result. I think they just what did the X just drop to? Just dropped under 100 grand
the
or
Tesla
90.
Price cuts have been crazy. Yeah,
just
the Tesla
nuts.
Man, dude, Q1 2023, the Model Y was the top selling car in the world. It's insane if you think about it. And
it's great. And to compare it, like what you're competing against now, the price of that is going up. Like a Model Y against, I don't know, Ford Explorer or something. I don't know what the equivalent would be. Like, I don't know what the net percentage increase in price would be based on these demands, but if it's anything material, it's just handing them another advantage, right?
Yeah.
Crazy.
And obviously, like, the last thing I'll say on that is, the Hail Mary, and Elon said it himself, right? It's binary. This is a multi-trillion-dollar company if we nail autonomy. And people joke about it, and he said it every single year for the last 6-7 years. But yeah, that's what the company's being bet on. So he's like, we're going to drop prices. We're willing to get in people because we'll make it back on software. Like that's their bet, right? So we'll see. I think but like even aside from that, like everything you said, Jack, is like the manufacturing edge is pretty clear what's going on here, right? Like just from a manufacturing standpoint.
And what, like we'd have to have someone far more knowledgeable on the nuance of it, but I wonder what time scale that is, like how much of an advantage that is, how inaccessible that technology is. Like that's not open source, is it? Like the patents for the manufacturing stuff, they're not giving that away, because that was a big question. That was
open source a lot of stuff. Let me see.
Right.
Open source Tesla manufacturing. Anyways, that's a great point. I don't know if they will, but I think they just open source on the car itself. But like you said, man, like the car design versus the factory, right? That's the difference.
It's a very different. I think we talked about this before. Just like the the DNA from the get-go. Very, very different technology mentality versus maybe what you're seeing with this other stuff is like, yeah, you have to lean into the nostalgia of a Ford, for example, and buy a F-150 with a 7-liter V8 in it. And that's like, yeah, that's a very different purchasing decision than a 3-row Tesla with doors that only open 2 inches out so you can get in, you know, in and out in the car park. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see it play out. And like, I'll get a little Roman Empire reference in here. The like the convergence of all of these like industries being displaced feels like history, you know, historic level events where you're like examining what people do with their time or what technology does to displace the way people spend their days. The 1500 years of like, oh, we have a wheel now. Everybody that was pulling shit along in a box is out of a job, or everybody except for one, right? So it's fascinating times to live through it, boys, and documenting it on the Not Investment Advice podcast for all time.
There we go.
Buddy, perfect way to book in this.
There we go. That was great. Great summary there, boys. Anything else before we lock off?
No, that was we'll hit up Garmin next week, and no, that was great, man.
I will say one callback to since we talked about it. I think you guys will like this. I looked up the origin of the phrase P's and Q's real quick. It's from an old printer's axiom. Back in the early days of the printing presses, each line of text had to be set up one letter at a time. Since the letters in the press were reversed, so they'd print forward, the printmaker or typographer needed to be careful not to confuse one letter for the other. Reminding someone to watch his P's and Q's means to pay attention to the details. Obviously, that's the origin, but you know,
Very good.
That was quite cool. I was looking that up earlier, and the reason I kind of on the Kano song, that was obviously he's using that phrase as the original, but like a lot of music, there's multiple reasons you use that, and it's like a double or triple entendre. So that is why I was thinking of pounds for some reason instead of paper when you said it, which was the
incredible.
There we go. Victorian axiom there. So, all right, that's a great way to finish off, boys. I think that was a good episode, and we will see everyone again next week. Cheers.